Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Antry, Associate Editor of Audioholics, and I'm here with...
Rob H. This is AV Rant, the show where we answer your questions about all things home theater and audio video. And it is the hottest day of the year so far where I am. It is blistering. So I have my air conditioning going behind me.
37.
But about 36.
36. How
Yep.
you suffer so.
I
It's
know,
like
man.
90? Is it 90? Something like that? 94?
Yep.
It's like, it was, I think it's been around in the mid-90s here, and about that in humidity. And then it rains just to make it steamy for like the last months.
Well, I'm still going to claim that I'm suffering because we're just so not used to it here. It's usually so temperate. But enough about the weather, because we have a heck of a packed show today. Yet
Do we
again,
really? I
think
feel like we should be able to blaze through this one.
we can most certainly try.
I think we should do a podcast where it's all yes or no, or like one word answers. What's wrong with our receiver? Broken. Okay.
I'm not sure that would go over so well. I want to say
Do I need
thank you
another
once
sub?
again.
Yes. That's pretty much.
There you go.
Oh,
To all the AV Rat listeners, to everyone who might be joining us for the first time or is relatively new to the show, we do basically just the whole show is just people's questions. So if we don't have questions, we don't have much of a show. And it's been quite an amazing run, I think, in my opinion. I'm just blown away every week. And so I'm so glad that this has been going on, and hope we just keep it rolling. More questions, more questions.
And our listeners of the week this week are Eliezer, Michael, with a very nice thank you note, Michael. You're welcome, Michael R. And Sim, or Simran, I think. Anyways, Sim. He signed his thing. Sim.
Yes.
He's from the UK, so I think we were spanning the globe this week a little bit. And they're all our listeners for the week. They became listeners of the week by going to the AV Rant website, www.avrant.com, and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and they left a PayPal donation, and that's how you become a listener of the week. It is not necessary to do that in order to get your question answered. To get your question answered, all you have to do is ask it. And you do that by emailing us at rob@avrant.com, tom@avrant.com. You can come to the website at www.avrant.com. And, of course, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, all one word. If you are a Twitterer, you're welcome to go to Twitter and get Rob at @FirstReflect, that's all one word, or me at avrant_Tom. You want to reach me. You can also try to hit us up on Google Plus, which sometimes works.
Or even in the comments over at AV Rant, since someone did leave a comment last week and I missed it, so we'll be adding that to the show. And I did want to mention, for example, Stephen R. last week, he had actually tried sending his email to us and noticed that it never showed up on the show, and it turned out, it ended up in a spam filter or got lost or something. So, if that ever happens, if you've ever asked a question and it's been, a week or two and you haven't seen hide nor hair of it, please send it again, because we absolutely answer everything that reaches us, and if it hasn't reached us, that's the only reason we wouldn't answer it.
There's yet to be a question that has not made it on this podcast that I've seen, that's for sure. Unless Rob's got some way of going into my email and deleting them without me seeing them. There's very little way of that happening. So yes, we answer them all, so ask away. Do we want to do this news thing? Is that happening, or are we just going to go on?
Sure. Well, it seems to be the way we've been going, and it's a quick little topic, which is that actually over at AVS Forum is the first place I saw it, so the link I'll be posting is where they posted it over there. But Dolby has released a white paper, two white papers, in fact, about Atmos for the home theater, one specifically just about their Dolby Atmos-enabled speakers, which are the speakers that have upwards-firing drivers built right into the same cabinet. So they've released those, and it's got some good information in there, stuff that wasn't made explicitly clear in the past. However, it didn't answer all the questions I had, so hopefully some more information will still be forthcoming, but it's definitely worth checking out. The one thing I really liked that they did make clear in the white paper was that if you already have front wide and or front height speakers, which they've never talked about previously, apparently Dolby Atmos, the actual processing, is capable of using those positions. Those positions are something that can be used by the renderer. However, it's up to the AV receiver manufacturer or the pre-pro manufacturer to actually implement that in their version of it. So it just because it's possible doesn't mean that it will necessarily happen, but at least there isn't a limitation there on the side of Dolby Atmos itself. So that was something I was wondering about personally. And yeah.
Since you've got those speakers and
Yes, exactly.
don't want to have to install stuff on your ceiling.
Yeah, because I mean, if you already have front height speakers, right? It's like, do you have to move those onto the ceiling? Well, technically, no. Atmos could use those front height speakers. They still want you to have at least one pair of speakers that are on the ceiling somewhere overhead. But, you could combine one pair overhead and then the front height speakers and sort of have both of those going. But it's up to the AV receiver manufacturer to implement that. You have to manually tell your receiver what speakers you have and where they go. And if they don't give you that option, sorry, out of luck. So that's it.
Not impressed so far with this whole Atmos thing. I'm glad they're trying. I think innovation is important, and I'm glad that they're doing something new. I just wish they would, come up with something that was like that last thing that I really got excited about was Odyssey. When Odyssey came out, that's when I really got excited. I got excited about HDMI, to be honest with you, even though it's burned us so many times. But the fact of the matter is, when it works, it's nice to have one cable. We used to have this big trunk of cables that went to your, at least you had the component video and then some sort of digital audio, and having one cable is kind of nice. It doesn't have to be the pain in the butt that it is, but it's kind of nice to have that one cable. Yeah, it's just this is not it. This is not the thing that's going to excite me. 4K is nice. It doesn't excite me. 3D never excited me. Atmos doesn't excite me. I don't think I'm just waiting for the day I walk into somebody's house and they have ceilings on their speakers. I'm go, oh my god.
Ceilings on their speakers.
You have speakers on their ceiling. Okay, let me just say this. I went to a wedding this weekend. I just got back last night or yesterday afternoon. I am still completely destroyed. I have been a zombie all day. So I'm drinking water, try to keep myself as alert as possible. It's unlikely that's going to work. So
yeah, actually, my excitement for Atmos is mostly that it's a shift in the way that soundtracks are created. I think it actually has more of an impact on the production side for the sound mixers than it does for us as an audience listening to it, because it does give them more freedom and it does allow for, panning of certain sounds that simply wasn't possible before with the old channel-based system. So I think that's actually sort of the more exciting part about it. And in that white paper they mentioned, one of the things I was wondering about is it the exact same soundtrack in the cinema and at home? And apparently no. They go into that a little bit in the white paper, and they say, no, there does have to be another mix done for the home, which is normally done anyway. But they do that mix, and it isn't limiting. They said that the current limit of 24 speakers on the ground and 10 speakers overhead, and apparently you can have subwoofers in addition to that, so it's 34 speakers and however many subs you want. But they said that limitation is actually because of the current renderers that the chips that they've built for the home processors. That's the limitation there. But the soundtrack isn't limited to that. It's conceivable we could have 64 speakers in our homes one day. So yeah.
Yeah, because it's so easy to get 5 speakers in a sub into people's houses as it is, but 64 is totally going to happen. It's ridiculous. But anyways, I agree with you. I do like the fact that it allows the mixer to come up with better and more interesting ways of panning simply by saying, I want it to be there, I want it to be there, here's the XYZ coordinate, and go.
Yeah. And since it does scale to however many speakers that are present, they can have the one soundtrack and they're done. They don't have to create separate mixes for different numbers of speakers. So I think that's valuable.
I do like that part of it. All right. So are we going straight down this list here, or?
Might as well, yeah. I wanted to mention this thing that Gabe forwarded via Google Hangout to myself. So. This is our recommendation for the week. We can have it at the top of the show instead of the end.
All right, well, let's wait on that. We're going to have some talk about the JB Audio Pro LSR305 studio monitors, which are apparently making waves in the AV community right now. Jared's got some information for us. Moani is also... Jared's got some information about our Harmony remotes. Moani has got some information about manufacturers. Jason has some help for one of our listeners in Australia. Wait a second. How about Stephen? Stephen from last week. Jason and Jeff both want to help out Stephen from Australia from last week. Last week did we bump Gary?
We bumped Gary. We sure did.
Oh well, we're gonna deal with Gary, I guess, or we might bump him again. Who knows? Stranger things may happen. Anand has some questions about amps, Odyssey, and a subwoofer upgrade. Jason, I think this might be a different one, asks about IIR versus FIR filters or FIR filters
I
versus
think that was
aural.
John. That was John.
Is it
Yeah.
John? What did I say? Jason?
Yeah.
Oh well, same thing.
Lots of J
Rawl,
names.
no, it's Jay. All those J names. It's Jesus asks about Rawl asks about low volume sound quality and dynamics. Leighton asks for step recommendations in a small room. Drew is trying to make some outdoor speaker decisions, which I think is a very good topic. I'm glad he asked it. Stephen R is looking for a new AV receiver now that we told him that his is crap. He's got
Oh.
well, it's not his fault. It's actually fine as long as he doesn't want to do any of the stuff he wants to do with it. So,
Yeah, there's that side.
yeah, there's that. Eliezer is kind of dropped a blog post in the middle of the room and asked us to do this sort of stuff that we do. And we have a couple of quick questions from Rennie, Mark, Lior,
Leor.
Leor. I'm never going to get that one right. And Michael about those are just quick questions about Chromecast, banana plugs, why a receiver is getting hot enough to cook stuff on, and how pre-outs work. So all that stuff will be covered in today's podcast.
Yeah, you said
Hopefully.
we didn't have a packed show.
I think we can do it
That's a
fast
packed
though
show.
if you
Okay.
don't do the thing that you normally do about all the talking and stuff. All right, so Gabe over on our Google Hangout afterwards. I think I dished us last week because I was falling asleep. Guess what I'm doing this week? Doing the same thing. Sorry guys. After we record on Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern time on Google Hangouts, you have to find me on Google and then put me in a circle, and then I'll put you in a listener circle if I don't know who you are. Because the only people I get their own circles are family, AV professionals that I know, and then I think a couple other ones. But basically, I shove everybody in the listener circle. So then you get invited to every week to watch us. You can always just kind of find it because it is public. We're not keeping it secret. Afterwards, usually around 11 p.m. Eastern time, we will have a little Google Hangout where we talk to you. Even though we had a listener from last week who showed up to talk to us, and right before he got there, somebody had said something about, "Hey, I heard something about this," and then we all started Googling, and he showed up, asked this question. I kind of half answered it, and then there was just typing, and I felt really bad. So come back, Aussie listener guy, because I felt like after you left, I was like, "Aw, I want to talk to the Aussie guy." Anyway, so come back. Gabe, send us basically a link to an AVS forum post from was it Scott Wilkinson? Is that who that is?
Yeah, he's the editor-in-chief over there now.
Basically, he's doing an AIX with the AIX guy, a high-resolution audio experiment. Took two versions of. What do you say? He posted 3 audio tracks created by Mark Waldrep, what's the AIX guy, with 2 versions of each track. One was the original 9624 version, and the other was a 44.116-bit version that was converted directly from the original and then upsampled back to 9624 so that people wouldn't be able to instantly tell which version was which by just having it show up on their little screen that says this one's 44.1, the other one, so this one's
That would make it hard for the experiment to be valid, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So far, only 6 people have completed the experiment using high-res capable of equipment. I don't know what that is because everybody's got a computer.
Something that can play it back without down converting it, and speakers that can supposedly play up to.
Well, aren't they using
48
headphones?
kilohertz.
I would assume people would be using headphones for this.
They said 2 out of those 6 people. I mean, there were more people who did the challenge, but only 6 people had what Scott Wilkinson determined to be high-res capable equipment. 2 of which were headphone setups. So, yeah.
And all 6 of these people have correctly identified all 3 tracks. Other people have listened using non-high-res capable equipment, and none of them could reliably tell which version was which.
One guy got 0. Like, he identified them inverted, which still could be a guess, but it might actually mean he thought that the ones that were down converted sounded better.
Could very well be, which he did correctly identify him. He was just identifying the wrong one.
That's right.
So the sample size is too small and everything else, but Rob, you identified a flaw. We haven't listened. I haven't done it. I definitely have set up to do it too, but I haven't done it.
I haven't done it yet, and I will put up the link for anyone who would like to. I mean, the way that they're doing it, they're not revealing the results. You have to email your results along with what equipment you use to play back the files to Scott Wilkinson, and then he will tell you how you did. But that experiment should be wrapping up actually, I think, by the end of this week. So it might be too late by the time you're listening to this to actually be part of the experiment data. But nonetheless, you can still listen to the files for yourself and see what you think. But yeah, when I just went ahead and downloaded the music, like I said, I haven't gone through the whole challenge yet. Right when you download it, the two different versions are slightly different file sizes.
Mm,
One of them is larger in each case. And it's
mm.
kind of unavoidable seeing that when you go to download it, at least in Windows, because it says how many megabytes you're downloading.
I'm pretty sure it does that in Mac too, so it's
Yeah.
not. Yeah,
So that is a little bit of a concern to me, because yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that
In
might be
in
a bit
in
of
two
a
in
problem.
two cases, track B was larger than track A, and then in the third case, track A was larger than track B, suggesting to me that well, you could draw your own conclusions.
Yeah. Well, and the
Yeah,
thing is too is there is all sorts of research that shows that their biases creep in very easily, and
very easily.
sometime without even the participants knowing about it. So they don't even know that they're being influenced, and they find out that these influences come in there, and they may not be paying attention to the file size, but some part of their brain is,
Mhm.
and it somehow influences them. Could very well be. Who knows? All right,
Yeah,
I'm
there's a
not.
couple. Yeah, there's a couple things I just wanted to mention. Like I am not against the idea that higher resolution files, particularly the part of using 24 bits versus 16 bits, so that you can have a wider dynamic range. That part to me, I'm entirely willing to believe that that can make an actual difference, one that you can even potentially hear. But the thing I'm taking away from this is, first of all, anyone who didn't have so-called high-res capable equipment did the same or worse than a coin flip, just guessing. So that means, I mean, the majority of people are not using high res capable equipment, stuff that can play up to 48 kilohertz or even play back these files necessarily. Or maybe they're running it through a room correction system like Odyssey, which down samples everything to 48 kilohertz.
Mhm.
So, that kind of stuff says to me, all right, even if it does make a difference in the file, potentially a lot of people wouldn't be able to hear it anyway, the majority of people. But then also the ones who could said, yeah, this track, it was really hard to tell. Eventually I got it, but it was really hard to tell. And this one was a little easier. But I mean, in no case are they saying it's this vast night and day difference. And I mean, Gabe is a fan of high res audio, and he genuinely believes in it being the superior format, and believes that if he listens to it for a long duration of time, he goes more by how he feels afterwards than so nobody is claiming that it's this big night and day difference, except for some real high res audio, supporters who are like, oh, it's this tremendous difference. How could anyone not hear it? And that's the part I don't buy. So that's my
Yeah.
take anyway.
They also think that having rocks and clocks in their home theaters make it sound better. So let's not talk about that. All right, Andy over at Facebook. He reviewed the JBL Audio Pro LSR 305 studio monitors. Whenever you hear studio monitors, you should immediately think, okay, they're self-powered. They have amps within them. These have it has a fabric dome tweeter, right, with a wave. They're inside of a wave guide, if I remember
Yeah, yeah, and
correctly.
it's a kind of special waveguide. I mean, actually, over on Home Theater Geeks, that's Scott Wilkinson's podcast, he talked to two of the guys from JBL Professional who were involved in creating this new waveguide that started out on their $20,000 per pair speakers, and then strangely, the only other ones that are using it are the LSR 305, which goes for $150 each, and the LSR 308, which I think is $250 each or something along those lines. Anyway, there's this gigantic price delta between the two series of speakers that use this new waveguide, but that is the sort of big technological leap that they've made with these.
Yeah, so Andy took a look on his website, noaudiophile.com. He shows up for our after podcast parties, hangouts every once in a while as well. Uh, and he really liked them. So he measured for really well. He found the off-axis response to be very, very good, which is one of the things that this particular waveguide is supposed to address. I'm not entirely surprised. I'm glad that JBL is doing something pretty nice. And the thing is, too, is studio monitors. The problem that you run into is people don't really know what to do with them. You know that you can put them in your office, or near field, but Andy also tested them in a further distance, which like a home theater, his home theater, said they sounded pretty good in there as well. Now, if you could find a processor or some sort of older receiver that had pre-outs, you could get these and then skip the amp section completely and have each one out. It becomes more of a pain in the butt to level match them. You have to, take your measurement and walk over there and adjust the volume knob on each individual speaker. But
And you need a wall outlet for each speaker, since
that's
it has
true.
its own amp built in and its own power cord. So
And you'll have to run, instead of running speaker cable, which is cheap, you have to run coax, which is not
eh,
that not expensive,
yeah.
but it's just a heck of a lot better than running HDMI or something. But yeah, there's that. There's that to consider too. But it might be it's 150 a pop. It's a
Mhm.
fairly easy way to get yourself a pair of nice speakers. He does suggest a couple of improvements you can make. Like think like the higher end waveguide. They use some sort of epoxy to kind of in the back of the waveguide to keep the waveguide itself from vibrating. He suggests that you might be able to do that as well, though. God help you if you mess it up.
It's also way physically larger in those M2s, the
Yeah,
$20,000 ones.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
in the smaller ones, but regular bookshelf size ones, the waveguide itself isn't large enough that that should be totally necessary. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not shocked. I'm certainly not shocked that they
Mhm.
measure well because any speaker that's designed to be listened to in near field kind of has to sound good. The room is taken much less into consideration, and because you're sitting so close to it that it's just right there. It's all very directed sound. The fact that it has a good off-axis response is good, and
Mhm.
it sounds like JBL is really trying to get these, price these so that they can get into studios, actual studios, recording studios, so that they are being used by professionals, which will, I mean, it's JBL Pro, so I mean, that's their line. So I think it's a good idea, and I am a fan of studio monitors just in general. I find that they tend to sound pretty good because the audience that they're being made for tends to be a little bit more discerning than the people that are going to Best Buy and trying to buy the one that has the prettiest grill. So there's that. Anything else you want to add?
Nope, I'm good with that. We have our comments for the week and some quick updates.
Yep, Jared F. Rob, I guess we both missed this last week, but he was
Mhm.
giving a thumbs up. He commented over on our website, avrant.com. Uh, he was giving a thumbs up to the Harmony Smart Control. Is that the one with the hub and the hard button remote with no touchscreen, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. He used to use the Harmony 880, but he likes the hub and the hard button remote a lot better. He says the setup on the new Harmony remotes is easier than the old one, but he does caution that updating the hub can be a bit of a hassle if you use the web software. Doing so requires you to plug the hub into your PC via USB. He prefers to use the mobile app, which lets him update the hub via Wi-Fi. Which is a good tip. I have not been using the smart the Harmony Ultimate. I have been using the 650 of my parents,
Hmm.
which I've done some programming on and stuff like that. And kind of run because what I did is I took my old receiver out of my home theater, and it was a 2307, Denon 2307. Basically gave it to him by putting it into the other room, and then I hooked everything up through it because I was tired of dealing with. Uh, multiple inputs on the TV, and I turned all the HDMI-CC crap off, which was killing me.
Yup.
And uh, yeah, it was fine because it worked pretty good. But what was happening with the Blu-ray player in particular was that, for reasons I can't quite understand, because basically it's going to HDMI from the Blu-ray up to the TV, and then from the TV the sound's going down via optical to these two, like basically little desktop speakers that I have. These little Harman Kardon Nova speakers, which I like quite a bit. But what was happening 2 or 3 times a movie is that the audio was getting out of sync. It was driving me absolutely bonkers. As soon as I turned CC off, that stopped happening. So, yeah, sucks.
Yet
Anyhow,
again, turning off HDMI
yeah.
CPC solves a problem.
But I've been
But
really impressed with the 650. I think it's a really quite decent remote. And the interface is not bad. There's not a ton of power that you can really do. I mean, there are, like we talked about last week or the week before, there are some some workarounds, but generally speaking, it works pretty well. I usually have to, I fiddle anyways. So I like being able to get into the devices really easily, and it gives you just about everything you really need. I programmed in some of my parents' favorite channels. It works a little goofy because instead of the remote, the remote will put all three or four uh, numbers in for the channel and then press enter. While the cable box just wants the four numbers and it doesn't need the enter. When you
There's a
press
way to adjust that. Just
yeah,
to
I
be
couldn't
honest.
find it,
Yeah.
and I didn't really care that much. I told my parents, but they're like, "Oh, whatever." I'm like, "Okay, well, you
Yeah,
guys don't
I
care
mean, the
enough."
takeaway for me is that I've yet to hear back from any of our listeners who have used the hub system
Yeah,
who have said that they didn't like it.
yeah,
The only complaints we've had are going back to the older remotes, which I can totally see. It's not that stuff technically couldn't be done, is that sometimes you had to get real creative to figure out how to do it.
yeah,
Things were not necessarily easy and intuitive, but everyone seems to like the hub system, so
yeah.
that's
I'm
another thumbs up there from Jared.
I'm getting excited about that when I get my home theater back. Which, by the way, I found out my parents are going to be here for a couple of more months because they're not going to be able to install the AC until the very end. So no one can live in Florida
Ah,
without AC. So it's going to be a couple more months. Moani over at Facebook wrote that he emailed Empyrean to let them know that he bought their speakers because of our podcast, and he'll do the same when he buys his SVS subwoofer. Yay! Keep doing that, guys. If you tell enough people, they're going to start contact us and say, "Hey, we hear you guys like us." I'm like, yes, we do.
yes, we do. Yeah, and if anyone else would like to help out the podcast, and they're not able to make a donation, which we totally understand. Other ways that you can help us out is leave us a rating wherever you download the podcast from, or write a review. But really, just giving us a rating or writing even a short little review, and we'd like to get the message out there that we are a question and answer show now. Someone might have heard AV Rant 4 years ago when it wasn't a question and answer show, and that's a pretty big change in the format. So all that kind of stuff really helps out
Yeah.
and makes the podcast more visible to
Yeah.
new listeners.
So iTunes is probably the best place to leave us
Yeah.
reviews. So let's see here. Jason and Jeff. Last week we talked about was it Steven? Yeah, Steven,
It was.
who is in Australia, and he was thinking about getting the SVS Ultras. We said, yeah, you can't order those without hearing them. That's just crazy talk. Jason says that Sound Air Hi-Fi in Melbourne is how they say it there, but Melbourne is how the rest of us say it. Over in Melbourne has the SVS Ultra speakers set up for listening, and they also have, of course, SVS subwoofers as well. And Jeff says that finallink.com.au is an Australian distributor of SVS, and that West Coast Hi-Fi in Perth stocks SVS products. I did not know that, and I drove by so many of those places. I never remember seeing SVS there, but maybe it's
Well,
specific ones.
maybe when you were living there, that wasn't the case because it's a pretty recent change for
Could
SBS
be.
that they're partnering up with actual retail partners. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
could be. West Coast Hi-Fi is all over the place in Perth too. I mean, it's
Hmm.
everywhere, and they're huge. So I'm not sure where Steven is. We'll have to find out. I think that was who was on the podcast, who was in the after party last week, and we all blew him off. It's all your fault, Rob, for being rude. Canadians are known for
Oh,
that.
right.
All right, we bumped Gary last week, but I guess we'll have to talk about this time. Gary recommended that we have a listen to another podcast, which, of course, I didn't do. It's called AcousticFields.com. I started listening to it, but I didn't want to anymore after a few minutes. Mostly, I really don't have time. One of our own listeners has his own podcast as well that I've listened to a couple of minutes of. So, and I actually want to listen to that one. I didn't want to listen to this one. Anyways, AcousticFields.com. I'm sure it's very good. It has a Google Hangout podcast, which is, if you're watching right now, it's like this, but without the good audio afterwards. Basically, it just sort of sounds bad.
And with only one guy talking, actually, it's more like
Is
an
there not?
interview style.
Was there going to be? There was. I thought there was going to be another guy on that. It sounded like there was two guys.
Well, yeah. I mean, the second guy is basically just feeding the questions, so it's only one guy answering.
Oh,
Yeah.
there are two people. Do you see two faces or just the one guy?
Nope, you just see one face.
Oh, that's annoying. Anyways, uh, Gary was curious to hear our opinion about the concept of over damping and trying to hear all of the recording with none of the room. So the idea of this is to try to make your room as much as an anechoic chamber as possible, which means lots of absorptive material all around your room. just get rid of all the reflections to absorb all the bass, tons of just fiberglass from floor to ceiling, and try to get rid of all of the external sound, so that all you're hearing is the speaker and the music that's coming out of it.
Hmm.
Is that pretty much what they were saying?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, I mean, the question came up. This is Dennis Foley from Acoustic Fields who's answering all the questions, and they were asking about can a room be overdamped, and I pretty much liked his answer, which was, well, it depends. One person's overdamped is going to be another person's underdamped. It depends on the application, the room size, the speakers, the setup, all of these things. So there isn't a strict right and wrong when it comes to how much absorptive material should be in a room. I tend to go by the sort of idea of a 30-70 rule, about 30% of your room being sound treated absorptively, and the other 70% of the room still reflecting sound in some way. But that is by no means a hard and fast rule. It's just a sort of a recommendation that a lot of people tend to follow. And by and large, I liked pretty much everything that Dennis had to say. I wouldn't be angry at all anybody listening to that and agreeing with him and taking his advice. I liked him saying it wasn't so much hearing none of the room, but just that the room should not end up masking detail and sounds that are in the recording, which it certainly can. Um, Someone was asking about should they take a pair of really good headphones and listen to the recordings on that and take that as sort of the benchmark. And he's saying, well, in terms of being able to hear the vocals, being able to hear details, being able to, he never used the word delineate, but that's the one he was looking for, and it's a word I like, delineate between individual notes and sounds, that, yeah, if you can hear it in your headphones, ideally, you'd be able to hear it from your speakers, too, in a real room. But, of course, the thing that changes largely between headphones and being in a room is the bass. There's really no way to get that full body tactile feel of bass with headphones, and there are going to be, certain parts of the sound when you're listening to bass on headphones that just sounds different when you're in a room, because the room is always going to be reflecting bass all around you, and it's going to be omnidirectional. It isn't that way when it's in headphones. So I agreed with all that. I didn't agree with his take on subwoofers, because he said, oh, I found a guy who had, four 15-inch subwoofers in a relatively small room, and that's just going to completely overpower the room. And I'm like, not if you don't turn up the volume too high. It doesn't. I mean, it certainly could. I agree with him that in terms of raw output, four 15-inch subwoofers in a small room is not necessary. Like you obviously have far more output capability than what you actually need, but that doesn't mean it
Necessary
has to over.
versus
Yeah,
awesomeness, though. I
that's
guess
right.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna go with the yes. I need that. I need it. I need it bad. SBS, are you listening? I need it. Need more subwoofer. I can't even fit any more subwoofers in my room. I just start
So yeah,
stacking them.
other than that, if you listen to what he's saying, you can pretty much say, yeah, at least Rob from AV Grant will mostly agree. I didn't find anything hugely objectionable in what he was saying at
Well,
all.
it sounds like I would agree with him too. Based on what you're telling me, I don't disagree with any of that except for the subwoofer thing. Yeah, the problem with people who have four subwoofers, and there's a couple of people in the Hangouts that have four subwoofers, and I'm not talking about you, so don't get yourself all twisted. Most people who have multiple subwoofers, not most, many, buy them because they like bass a lot. So they don't want to buy four subwoofers and not have a lot of bass. So they're going to turn them up a little bit too loud. That's not why we're recommending buying more than one subwoofer, but that's why some people do it, and that's fine. All right, that's what they like. You don't have to like it, but that's what they like. There are some things to think about, and a lot of people don't talk about this when you overdamp a room. Uh, First of all, it turns your room into basically a cooler or an ice chest or oven, depending on how you look at it. It is you have insulated that room. You're adding insulation to it. So that means if you've got a projector in there and it tends to warm up your room, it's going to continue to warm up that room. It's going to keep getting hotter and hotter. It's going to be harder to cool the room off. It's also going to be harder to warm the room up when the room gets cold. It's going to take longer to get there. I have experiences. My office back in Jacksonville, when I was living there, I had like 19 4-foot by 2-foot by 4-inch thick panels hanging in a 10 by 11-foot room. They were all over the ceiling, all over the walls. And it was great. When I'd first get in there, I'd be like nice and chilly, and I'd be working, and by the end of the day, the sun would start hitting that side of the house, and I would be cooking in there. And I'd walk out and go, why is it so much cooler everywhere in the house but my room? The other thing that you're not going to really think about is this. We often talk about hey, you don't need tower speakers because you don't need to have that sort of output because most rooms are, you're going to be sitting close enough. The rooms aren't that big. You're going to have a subwoofer, all this other stuff. But you overdamp that room and you are taking so much information, so much energy
Hmm.
that those speakers are putting out, taking it out of the room and turning it into heat, warming up your room even more, that you have to turn your speakers up louder. So now you're getting into the realm of, well, I bought these speakers and they were fine, but then I put in, 17 cubic feet of insulation, and now my speakers are making this clanging sound. Well, and I've seen that happen. Like those,
Yep.
I reviewed Usher speakers a long time ago, and they were fantastic. I took them to Gene's ginormous room with dampening, material all over the place, and he broke them twice. Okay, I mean, because he just couldn't get them to play the right volume
Hmm.
in order to measure them and to do all the stuff he needed because of all the damping that was going on in that room. Now there's other problems, obviously. That wasn't a well-designed speaker in that case, but in a smaller room, you would never have run into that problem. You certainly would never have run into it if you didn't have, all that damping material going on. So there's that to think about as well. And then, like Rob's saying, that 70-30 rule. That the idea is that it starts to sound unnatural, and you're
Yeah,
just
we're
not.
not used to really heavily damped rooms. We're just not used to it. So it sounds odd to us. It just strikes us as sounding odd.
Yeah.
Not necessarily wrong, but just a little bit strange.
And people
Yeah.
will complain like, "Oh, I can kind of hear my blood pumping. What is that about?" Well, it's just you're not used to hearing it, and you're hearing that going through your ear, basically. You're near your eardrum and everything else. So that can be a real issue for a lot of people. Like, it never bothered me. I didn't mind having the overdamped room for that room. I loved working in there. It was very nice. Couldn't hear the kids. It was amazing. But that being said, there are other things other than just whether or not it's a good idea or how natural it's going to sound. There's going to be physical things that are going to happen, and you may actually find out that now I've done this, and now I need bigger speakers because I can't play them loud enough without damaging them.
Yeah, he made one other good point, which was that he said sometimes he has people, they bring their favorite recordings, they come into his room, which is really heavily treated, and I mean he has diffusion and absorption,
Yeah.
but it's the really heavily treated room, and they listen to their favorite recordings and they don't like the results initially because they've literally never heard the recording sound that particular way before because they've always heard it in a much more reflective room, and that can absolutely happen too. I mean, I fall on the side of I tend to like a more heavily damped room than probably most people would. But I do exactly what he was mentioning, which is I take my higher end headphones as my reference point. If I can delineate between some notes using my headphones and I can't do it on my speakers, I blame my room. I'm like, I got too many reflections in this room. It's smearing the sound, or it's poor quality speakers that are smearing the sound. So, if you're not used to the way it sounds, it can be a little bit of a shock if you really heavily damp a room.
Yeah, the other thing you have to consider too is what was this, what was the person who was mixing this? Where were they? Were they in a completely damped environment? Well, and were they expecting this to be played back in a completely damped environment? Have they in some way during the mix come up with some solutions, some estimations of what they think will be some problems, and they're going to try to tweak things for that? I don't know. You don't know either. But most people don't have that really heavily damped room, so you might be not hearing it the way that the original mix person, a recording engineer, intended. So there's lots of things. Generally speaking, this is not an issue you're going to run into. Most people aren't going to try to overdamp their rooms, even if they could. Most people can't because, no one would let them. I know my wife wouldn't let me, but yeah. So it's an interesting thought. A question to ask and have answered. So Gary, there you go. Ask us something for next week so we can bump it for the week after that.
That's right.
All right. So now on to questions and discussions for this week, and who was actually a question from last week. He has a couple questions about amps, Odyssey, and a subwoofer upgrade. He's a longtime AV Rant listener ever since the days of Dina. So he's been around for a while. He does like the Q&A format, and he's very happy that we're doing that and hopes that we continue, which we will until we run out of questions, at which point we'll start skipping weeks until we get enough questions for 2 hours. All right, question number one. The product sheet for his Onkyo TXNR1010 AV receiver mentioned things like isolated power amp and preamp blocks and discrete output stage circuitry. We've also talked in the past about amplifiers that all share one big power transformer and one bank of capacitors versus modular designs with smaller separate transformers and capacitor banks for each output channel. What are the advantages of all of this stuff? Okay. First of all, let's talk about that second part, okay? So we talk about the modular design. We almost never see this anymore. I want to say I just saw a receiver or something that came out with this recently. Somebody's got it's NAD. NAD does a modular design, but it's not for their amps. And they do it for like you're supposed to be able to take out some, oh, you don't want the HDMI. Here's an analog one, or you want this, you can do a
Right.
modular design. So they're used to. It was a fad when I first started in the in Audioholics to have. Well, and Emotiva I think was one of the first ones I saw with it, though there may have been others before them. And it was basically there's a what we call the blade design. So it was a big box. It looked like a normal amplifier or receiver sized box, and there would be a bunch of vertical blades that you could stick in there. So the advantage of this was that, and this is what people thought, you got completely isolated amplifier channels. I mean, so crosstalk, no channel bleeding into another. All right, you got on the blade would be the power transformer, all the circuitry and everything else, and at the end of the blade, when you would have the the input and the speaker outputs and stuff like that. So the advantage was supposed to be that there was this complete isolation of channels, which everybody thought was a good idea, and it was nice also that you could buy this big box and buy two channels and leave the rest of them blank and slowly buy the rest of it so that you can work your way up to your 7 channels. Or back then, I think it was only 5 channels anybody ever really offered, and that was sort of the advantage. Now the disadvantage is that you no longer have that large power supply with all that power at its beck and call, with that large banks of capacitors that could instantaneously put out a ton of power to 1 or 2 or 3 channels when it needed to. Because the fact of the matter is those smaller transformers are just fine, and the smaller banks of capacitors are just fine for your surround channels and probably even your center. But your mains are going to need a lot more power potentially than any other speaker. In fact, maybe all the rest of your speakers combined. So you've now got these blades which are just fine for most of your channels but may struggle with your main channels. Okay, so we got, and I even talked to the Emotiva guys that we got away from that because really what we were finding were that people were struggling with just their main channels, and we figured it was because they didn't have that instantaneous power that they may need for just those specific situations for the mains, and we really weren't seeing the benefit that we could see just by really good amplifier layout. And that's going back to your first part where it says isolated power amp and preamp blocks and discrete output stage circuitry. Everybody's saying that these days. What they're saying is that each amplifier channel is discrete, that they don't interact with each other. You don't have to worry about some crosstalk, something bleeding from the center channel to the mains unintentionally. Okay, and when they say stuff like isolated and that sort of thing, what they're saying is that it's on different boards or they're completely separated. And a lot of times they'll say stuff like short signal path, and that just means everything's close to where it needs to be without a bunch of runs everywhere. I'm sure Rob will go on about that. So,
Oh,
no,
not too much. I mean, it's also largely a matter of cost.
yeah,
It's more cost effective to have one large capacitor and one large capacitor, or one large sort of transformer and one large capacitor bank that all of the channels can share, because like Tom just said, the vast majority of the time, most of your channels don't need it, and then 1 or 2 do. So it doesn't make sense to have the entire available power that those output transistors for each channel, you can have all the power that they can possibly handle on one blade each, that's a huge cost upgrade. I mean, that's what ATI does. You know, ATI does have a modular design in terms of the actual amplifier blades that drive each channel, but then they share a gigantic power transformer. I mean, they actually put two gigantic power transformers in there. But you know, each individual blade has its own capacitor bank and its own separate winding off of that main transformer, but they overbuild it to the point that you know each individual one can supply all the power that that channel could possibly handle. But that's a huge cost upgrade. It's one of the reasons they're expensive amps, and you know, so cost-wise, that just isn't the most efficient way to do it. But you know, then you've decreased any chance of crosstalk and all of those other benefits. Are you willing to pay for it? And pretty much never use it for your surrounds and surround
Yeah,
packs and stuff.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, as to the other stuff, yeah, it's exactly what Tom said. It's just literally having it on different boards, having a separate DAC for each channel instead of sharing a DAC between channels and things like that. So it's the same thing. It's trying to get rid of any sort of crosstalk, any sort of electromagnetic interference that might happen by having everything physically attached on the same PCB board. But other than that, it's not exactly anything unique. It's just something they can throw on the spec sheet that looks kind of fancy.
yeah.
But I can
Well,
totally see.
at one point it was unique. That's the thing. It
Right.
used to be that
Yeah.
discrete amplifier topology was something that we only saw in like flagship receivers.
Sure. Yeah.
That wasn't that long ago. That was the case. Now Denon's got it all the way down their line on every single spec sheet, all the way down to the $200 receiver. Everything's discrete now. Well, I mean, it's not. It makes it no less true. Is it cool? It is cool, but it's like cool like having a seatbelt in your car is cool. Like it's really cool to have that because if you don't, it sucks. But it's not exciting. And it is still a better design than the Blade
Right.
stuff. Especially the original, not what you're talking about with the ATI, but the original Blade where you put the power supply on the Blade.
Yeah.
That was kind of crap. All right. Over at the HT guys, our friends Ara and Braden have recently started getting into separates. What are the advantages of getting a separate external amp versus the amps built into an AV receiver? Is this just more power? Would an external amp still have an advantage even if the power output were the same as an AV receiver's built-in amps? Okay. Part of this, I think, I don't know which way to attack this. Let's go with, I guess the question is, what are the advantages of an external amp versus the amps built into an AV receiver? Generally speaking, the amps that are external are more robust. That means that if you're buying a 100-watt amp the receiver that's got 100 watts, the external amp that's a 100-watt amp is going to be more robust and have a larger power supply. It's going to have maybe more capacitors. It's going to have more ability to put instantaneous power out. Maybe overbuilt slightly. Maybe cool better. Maybe all sorts of little things. It's certainly separated from the rest of the processing that's going on. So the processors in one box and the amps are completely separated in the other. So any possible interference between one and the other is then, of course, eliminated. What are the advantages? For me, in most cases, I don't see that there are any. Other than it's very cool, and I love external amps, don't get me wrong. But I don't see that there's a lot of advantage because what you're really looking for with an external amp, like if you look at Gene's setup, right? He's got these big, massive $50,000 speakers. They got three or four subwoofer in each, big subwoofer drivers in each speaker. Plus, I mean, it's just a ridiculous amount of power that these speakers require. Well, you need large amounts of power to give them, and usually special 220 outlets to do it with. But that's not something that most people are running into. Most people are like, do I really need this in my home theater? My 14-foot by or 17-foot by 12-foot by 8-foot home theater. The answer is no, you don't. You don't need it. Do you want it? Well, that's perfectly fine if you want it, but you don't need it. I think to me, and maybe Rob, I assume you agree. It seems to me to be a holdover from the days when receivers sort of kind of sucked. Back in the day when amplifiers in receivers were really quite substandard. And I mean, I guess probably back in the day, processors and amplifiers were always separate, and they kind of melded them together for receivers. And then as soon as you did that, everybody went, "Oh, they're crap." And they probably were pretty crap. They had to brag about the fact that they had discrete amplifiers in their flagship receivers. Well, now that's sort of kind of gone away, and we're back to all the amps, and there are all kind of pretty good now, and we're not running into a whole lot of issues where you're hearing people say, "Oh, well, my receiver blew up because it couldn't power my horn-loaded speakers." You're just not
Mm-hmm.
seeing that too much.
Yeah, the real trick here is him asking, if you had an external amp and an AV receiver and they both had the same power output, would the external one have any advantages? Not really. But the thing is, it's really rare that they have the same actual power output because I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a receiver that is actually rated all channels driven. Full frequency range from 20 to 20 kilohertz. Almost all of them are rated for 2 channels driven, or the standard is actually 1 channel driven to full power, and the remaining channels driven to 1/6 of their normal power. Which, if you have a 7 amp receiver, ends up being the same as 2 channels driven. But when you see 100 watts per channel listed on an AV receiver, and then you see 100 watts per channel listed on a separate amp, those aren't the same thing. Even though they both say 100 watts per channel, one of them can only deliver 200 watts. It can deliver 100 watts per channel, 2 channels driven. The other one can deliver 500 or 700 watts if it's a 5 channel or a 7 channel amp, respectively. So it isn't apples to apples just looking at how many watts per channel. You have to look at how many total watts can they actually deliver, and then it gets into that whole thing of we rarely need more than 1 or 2 watts per channel for the vast majority of content. So there it just doesn't make a difference. Tom,
Yeah,
it looks
and
like you have
the
something you want to
problem with
say.
that though is that the all channels driven. We've been talking about that on Audiaholics for years and
Mm-hmm.
years and years, and it really runs into this whole, you know, Gene likes to measure things 2 channels driven, and it's not instantaneous. It's for a longer period of
Mm-hmm.
time, and that is a more real world measurement. And on top of that, I mean, this is getting kind of technical here. A lot of times when they rate amplifiers, they hold the power, the power that's coming into the amplifier steady. They use special equipment to do that. Gene doesn't do that. He just plugs it into the wall. All right, because he's like, that's real world. People don't have special equipment to hold the voltage steady so that you can get the best possible measurement. You can plug it into the wall and see what it does. And the all channels driven, a lot of times it's an instantaneous thing, and it's, first of all, it's not very realistic. I mean, yeah, okay, you can put out 100 watts into 5 channels, so 500 watts for a second at 1 kilohertz or whatever their measurement technique that they're using,
Mm-hmm.
but you never need that, ever. Ever. I can't imagine a situation where you would need 500 watts into 5 speakers all at the same time.
I guess you could do, all channels mono, crank up your volume,
Yes, and you would get what you
literally send the
deserved.
same signal to all of your
So,
speakers.
okay, it's very easy to get into separates. I love the idea of
Hmm.
separates. I have like a 2 channel separates setup over there that is just still in the box because I don't have any place to put it right now. I've run multi-channel amplifiers and I love having them around. I think they're great, and it certainly is very cool. The question is really, do you need it? And the question you should ask yourself is, have I ever been in a situation where I thought, if only my amplifier hadn't just seized up and switched off, then we could still be watching this movie right now. Because if you haven't run into that situation, you don't need it. Do you want it? Sure, I want it. I think we all want it. I think we all want it. We just don't need it. And
Yeah,
that's what it really comes down
to
to.
me, the actual audible advantages of an external amp are very slight. I'm not going to say that they don't exist whatsoever, but they're subtle. The thing I mainly look for is a lower noise floor. That's honestly the thing I care about the most, because a lot of AV receivers don't have the greatest damping factor, and the damping factor is what comes into play when, I've mentioned before that the speakers don't just produce sound, they also pick up any vibrations that are in the room. They act as microphones. When that speaker diaphragm moves in and out because it's being vibrated by the air, that sends an electrical signal back down your speaker wire into your amplifier. So they're creating a sound at the same time that they're getting a signal to generate sound. And so you have this damping factor in your amplifier that basically mitigates that backfeed sound wave coming from the speakers. So, a lot of AV receivers don't have a very high damping factor, and most external, good quality external amplifiers do. They have, or at least they have a much higher damping factor than the one that's built into your AV receiver. So you connect up 7 speakers, you might hear a soft hiss coming from your AV receiver. You connect it up to an external 7-channel amp, that hiss goes away. Got a higher damping factor, or it just naturally has a lower noise floor. But that's a pretty subtle thing. So,
Yeah.
is that
Again,
worth all the
if
money?
this is not something
Maybe.
that you've ever thought to yourself, oh, if only that hiss wasn't there, I could really
Right.
enjoy this movie, that sort of thing. So, that being said, if you want it, buy it because I'll support you 100% of the time. All right, third question: if he, and now I forgot who asked this question, we are back up
Anand.
to Anand. Okay, if he had bought an external amp, could he have saved money and bought a less expensive AV receiver than the Onkyo TX NR1010, which I think is one. Is that their flagship or pretty close to it, right?
No, that was the third from the very top in that year, which is a couple, two and a
Yeah, a
half
couple of
years
you
ago
guys.
now.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. The problem you're running into here, and we've talked about this before, is that in order to have an external amp, you need to have pre-outs. In order to have
Mm-hmm.
pre-outs, in fact, we just had a listener, I think it was Gabe, who was
It
looking
was
for
Gabe.
who was looking for a receiver. We were all like, oh yeah, get the X4000 or whatever it was, and he was like, yeah, it looks great. He goes, but I need pre-ins, because he's had some legacy gear that he could not connect via HDMI or any other way, and he wanted to use the multi-channel surround sound. So you need preamps. They're like, oh, well, you're screwed, dude. We got to go way up in order to find something that can do that. So could you have saved some money? Yeah, you could have maybe saved a little bit of money, but any money you would have saved, you would have spent that and more on a good quality amplifier for 5 or 7 channels, whatever you have. On top of that, as you go, if as you try, you buy just stop looking at wattage on receivers and buy a receiver based on the features that you need. You need
Right.
look at the right inputs, look at the features that you need. You know what I used to buy the X4000? I used Odyssey Multi-Q XT Sub EQ thingy. That's what I wanted. I could
Mm-hmm.
care less about the rest of that nonsense because I know what I'll use. I've used it for years, and all the rest of it sounds great, right? The networking, all that other stuff. That sounds amazing. I'm looking forward to playing with all that stuff. But what I'm really looking forward to is Odyssey. That's the only thing that was important to me. So what's really important to you? What features are really important to you? And if those features also include, can be found on a receiver that does not have pre-outs, well, then you now have to bump up to something that has pre-outs in order to add your external amp. Chances are, you will get if you're interested in features at all, you will have already gotten to pre-outs long before you got your feature list uh, sorted, and that would have just been something they would have tacked on along with a bunch of DSPs you're never going to use. Uh,
Yeah, it really comes down to the features more than anything else. And I mean, the year that the Onkyo 1010 came out was the same year that the 818 came out, and the 818 had almost an identical feature set to the 1010, but it had THX Select instead of THX Ultra certification. It had slightly less powerful amplifiers. Maybe that's the one specifically that Anand was looking at and being like, oh, I could have got the 818 and bought an external amp instead. But combined, you would have certainly ended up paying more than the 1010.
yeah.
And if you had gone any lower, you wouldn't have had the necessary pre-outs to connect the external amp. So ultimately, adding an external amp is almost always going to cost you more in combination with whatever receiver can be connected to it than getting a higher end receiver like you did.
The
So,
flip
yeah.
side of that we all often talk about, or at least I often talk about, is that you can save money by, instead of buying separates, buying a good quality receiver with good clean pre-outs and an amplifier than buying a processor and an amplifier, because processors tend to cost more than receivers, and they usually don't even have as good of features. So if you want the features, you need the receiver, and the receiver will have you get the pre-outs, then you're still going to be paying less than a processor. That's where you save your money, is by buying a receiver instead of a processor. Now, generally speaking, uh, you have to be careful with that because the receiver sometimes will have noisy pre-outs or noisier pre-outs than the processor will. And if you're like Rob and you're sensitive to these sorts of things, you need to, or you're in a situation where you're going to be really paying attention to it, you need to be cognizant of that and make sure that you're you're reading reviews to see what sort of information you can find out about it. That being said, just because it's a processor does not automatically mean it's going to have these super clean outputs. Not only that, some amplifiers require a certain voltage from the pre-outs, which some receivers will put out and some receivers won't. Gene is always very, very good about when he measures receivers, making sure that he measures those sorts of things so you know how much voltage is coming out, so whether or not it's going to be able to drive an amplifier without it having an issue. So that's something to think about as well. Did I skip anything?
Yep. But now we find out what speakers Anand has, and it
All right,
becomes very
after
clear he does
all
not have an
that,
external amp.
after all that, Anand tells us that he's using Klipsch RF7 speakers in the REL T1 subwoofer. He's running Odyssey. Okay, let's just stop there. You're running Klipsch speakers. You can power them with a tube amplifier connected to a clock radio, and to ear bleed. You could shatter windows with those things. Literally, the easiest speakers on the planet to drive are Klipsch. I mean,
Well, not quite literally, but, yeah, they're way up there.
They're mass market. How about that? Mass market
Yeah.
speakers. I don't think it comes much easier to drive than Klipsch. You have to get some sort of esoteric, like those avant-garde big horn things in order to get anywhere near Klipsch. So you need an external amplifier like I need another son. I've got 3. Believe me, I do not need another one. You do not need an external. If someone gave me one, I'd be like, fine, whatever. But you do not need an external amplifier. Your 1010 could your speaker.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's just not
No problem.
No, not THX Ultra certification. Are you joking? You will kill those speakers. You will destroy them. You will melt them down to slag before you run out of power. Anyways, all right. So he's using the Klipsch RF7 speakers and REL T1 subwoofer. I didn't realize those were that popular. These RELs. I never really looked that much into them until recently because of a question. So he's running Odyssey and always sets his center and subwoofer levels to negative 11 dB, which is probably about as low as it goes. He finds it irksome that it sets their levels so low, and he prefers to set them both to negative 6 dB. Seems random, but okay. Is there some setting he could fiddle with so that Odyssey won't set the channel level so low? Well, first of all, your subwoofer volume is set too high. that fixes that. So you turn that down, and then you won't have to worry about it. That's kind of how, basically, that's what Odyssey is telling you. The center channel is a little bit more weird. Now setting it up 5 dB is huge. It's massive. That's a massive change in volume, and your center channel is going to be just based on what Odyssey is telling you, it's going to be quite a bit louder than everything else now. I mean, significantly louder than everything else. If that hasn't bothered you, then I'm really kind of confused as to what's going on here. But let's say for the sake, because I mean, he didn't really tell us what it set the rest of his speakers at, right?
No, he did not.
So it's not for all we know, they're setting everything else at negative 10.
Yeah.
But let's assume that everything else is 0, set to 0, and then the center channel is set to negative 11. Something weird is going on there, and I'm at a loss. I gotta believe it's something placement wise. It's about the only thing I can think.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if it's setting all of your speakers to something relatively close, -8, -9, it's not that surprising because you have quite a powerful amplifier built into that 1010, and you have very efficient speakers in your Klipsch. I don't know how large your room is or how far away you're sitting or where you position the microphone during the setup, but it's not that surprising to have it knock it down to -11 dB because you've got very efficient speakers and a powerful amplifier. And what Odyssey is doing is attempting to set things so that when you set your volume dial, your master volume dial, when you set that to 0 dB on the dial, that should represent reference volume, which is 85 decibels on average with 105 decibel peaks. And there's every possibility that if you turned your volume up to 0 and you didn't trim your center channel down 11 decibels, that it would be playing at 96 decibels, which is way too loud. Yeah. So this isn't necessarily anything wrong. This might be exactly where they need to be. It isn't that shocking given the amp you have and the speakers you have.
No, I mean, especially if it's got a smaller room. I mean, you're right. It could definitely be that. You know, we have to know with the rest of the speakers. If they're all being set around the same, and -11 is the thing that's bothering him, I think you're just gonna have to get over that. The subwoofer is definitely that you've got the subwoofer volume too loud. I mean, there's just no
Yeah, and a
other.
lot of times, the manual in a subwoofer, if you're just going by that, it'll tell you turn the volume on your subwoofer up to the halfway point
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
run anything. And a lot of people just go by that because, hey, it's in the manual. I don't blame anyone for following what
yeah,
the manual says to do. But this is a case where you can manually go ahead and turn down the volume knob on your subwoofer until it doesn't do that. But the thing is, having it set at -11, there is nothing bad about that. It is not robbing you of power. It is not making your speakers too quiet. The only thing it's doing is it's saying when you have your master volume set to 0 dB, I had to make your speakers, these two in particular, 11 decibels quieter, or they'd be too loud for reference volume. That's all it's saying.
yeah.
So if it's just bugging you because you never want to see it go below -6 for some reason, like that isn't, there's no technical reason for that to be a problem. If
Yeah.
that's what it is, that's what it
You
is.
could you should move your speaker back. Basically, just build out your room and move your speaker away.
Yeah, my thought actually was that maybe his center speaker is actually recessed into some sort of cabinet, or it's on a TV stand and it's pushed back quite close to the TV, and he's actually getting a lot of reflections off
Could
of
be.
whatever his center speaker is
Yeah.
sitting on, and
Yeah.
that's boosting its volume as far as the
Yeah,
microphone is
that's
concerned.
what I was saying. It's some sort of play, other than that if everything's set around the same level, well, then don't worry about it and just get over. Just
Mhm.
stop looking at that number. Just stop. Just assume it's fine and just run it again and close your eyes. And when it's over, just say okay and then don't look at it again. And that way you'll be fine. I mean, honestly, because what Rob's saying is
Yeah.
absolutely right. It's just basically trying to set it up right the way it should be. Now, if there's still more room past -11, well, then you really know it's right. If -11 bottoms it out, well, then maybe it might even want to set it lower, which you might need because you've got these really super ultra efficient speakers, which is what you got with Klipsch. That's what you get for buying Klipsch.
The
Uh,
other part of it is, he's very likely not listening at full reference
oh
volume.
yeah,
He very likely does not have his master volume set all the way up to 0,
yeah,
and therefore he might be finding that I'd like my subwoofer to be a little louder. It sounds better to me when I turn it to
yeah.
-6 instead of -11. Turn on Odyssey Dynamic EQ. Do not turn on Odyssey Dynamic Volume. I hate that thing, but turn on Dynamic EQ. You can do them independently, and that will make your subwoofer sound audible. It might be the same case with his dialogue. He might be finding that he wants a little bit of an extra boost, and that's why it sounds better, and that will happen if you turn on Dynamic EQ.
There you
So,
go.
yeah.
Lastly, Anand, his REL T1 subwoofer has specs saying it plays down to 30 hertz. His front speaker specs also say they play down to 30 hertz. Should you consider upgrading his subwoofer? Yes. Will the
Yep.
SVS PB2000 be a big upgrade? Yes.
Yes.
That's the end of that. Also, just because your speakers say they play down to 30 hertz doesn't mean you shouldn't set a crossover. Set a crossover. Okay. That being said, yes, you will notice a significant difference. Wait, you're gonna be getting at least 10 hertz more extension. And
I
the
would venture
SVS.
more than that, to be
I
honest, but
said at least. I
yeah.
said at least. The PB, you're gonna be getting down to like at minimum 20. You're gonna be down to 18 hertz range. You keep that other one around. Just show it what a real subwoofer can do. You know, before you sell it. But yeah, it'll be a big upgrade. I so rarely get to say that because there's so many times people are like, oh, should I buy an external amp? I don't care. Yeah, sure, whatever, it's fine. Will it make things sound better? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, probably not. Probably sound exactly the same. You'll sit there for hours trying to convince yourself that you didn't waste your money, but that's okay. Don't buy it because you think you're going to get a big change. You got a DAC. You need a DAC. You got a high noise floor and your crappy computer output. Hey, you're going to notice it right away. Yes, get one. You got a subwoofer that plays down to 30. Yes, you are gonna notice a difference when you start hitting sub 20. When you get to sub 20 and you realize how many things in your room could shake that were not shaking, that's when you'll go, oh yeah, that was money well spent right there. You'll always look around your room. That's what you're gonna think. You're gonna go, this is gonna be a lot of work, I'm loving never. You're gonna get this crazy, stupid grin on your face too. I'm telling you, it's like it's better than having somebody hand you a kid that you didn't want. You know, like if I was got fourth, if I had the fourth one, fourth, if I had a fourth boy, that this podcast would be over. I just like, oh, that's it. I give up. I'm moving to Tibet and go live on a mountain. All right, John M over at Facebook asks about IIR filters versus FIR filters. He wants to know the advantages and disadvantages of IIR filters versus FIR filters. He asks whether we'd recommend an AV receiver with the IIR room correction or the FIR correction more highly. He used the examples of YPOW, which is Yamaha's room correction, or Odyssey, which is the first one I ever heard of with fur filters. Now, I have to be honest with you, I didn't do the research on this one because I had like an hour before this podcast, and I was so destroyed that I took a nap instead of doing the read. I was like, I got to read about fur filters. I started reading and went, ugh, and I fell asleep. So, Rob, inform us.
Right. So first of all, IIR stands for Infinite Impulse Response, and FIR stands for Finite Impulse Response. And as you might guess from those names, it has to do with time, infinite versus finite. And so the infinite impulse response, the IIR filters, are ones that it's a filter, it's there, the signal comes in, and that filter keeps on applying whatever it does to that signal indefinitely. It never stops, it never turns off, it's just always there doing what it's doing. If you include a feedback circuit, it's going to apply the filter to the feedback as well. It just keeps on going and going. So every type of passive filter, this is most crossovers that you'd find in a speaker, anything that's called a high-pass filter, a low-pass filter. These are all examples of IIR filters. They're just always there, always acting on the signal. Now, an FIR filter is finite. You can define how long that filter is active. And as you might guess, that requires some processing. There is such a thing as an analog fur filter, but it's a crazy contraption. So almost any fur filter you find will be a digital fur filter. There can be digital and analog IIR filters as well. So any of the room correction, speaker correction, automatic EQ, they're all digital. None of those are analog. But the crossover that's inside of your speaker, that could very well be analog. It's just a series of resistors and capacitors and inductors. So the fur filter, by and large, has the advantage. It can do anything an IIR filter can do. You can set up a finite infinite response, impulse response filter to be an IIR filter. Or you can tell it only act for this duration of time, or only act when the signal reaches this level, or all sorts of things. You can define the parameters of when that filter comes into action. So by and large, it has the advantage. The only real disadvantage of it is it's more expensive to implement because you have to have that processing. And so, Odyssey was one of the first ones to bring it to a reasonable price level, but now almost all of the companies are starting to use fur filters because processing has become cheap and easy to implement. So, YPAO, that's the Yamaha Parametric Acoustic Optimization, their original version were just IIR filters. They were parametric filters, but they were just always present. They never dealt in any sort of time domain. Now they have YPOW plus RSC, that is their reflected sound control. Anything that talks about controlling reflections or acting within the time domain is a fur filter. MCACC from Pioneer, they've done the same thing. They have MCACC Pro now, and it talks about applying filters in the time domain. That means they've upgraded from IIR filters to FIR filters. So that's really the difference, and there's no downside to fur filters. They're just more expensive.
That should tell you right there which one is better, which one we would recommend. If Odyssey's been doing it for a long time, but if everybody else is switching to them too, yeah, I don't think we have to do the math for you on that
you can
one.
Do more with them. That's all it is. It doesn't mean you'll always like the results better.
No.
It does not mean that.
Oh no. Oh no. Let's not go there. Let's not go there. You may if to give the analogy of like cars, just because a car can is more powerful and fit more people and go faster doesn't mean that you're gonna like driving or owning it. Just means that or you like the way it looks. Just means that it has those advantages over other cars. Okay.
Yep.
Rawl over on Facebook, he has the first generation Andrew Jones Pioneer speakers and a Denon AVR 391. That sounds like a pretty entry level receiver. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I think it was $250 MSRP. So
Sounds about
it's
right.
definitely on the entry level side.
Now this one doesn't have Odyssey, so it's definitely going to be within the first one or two.
Yep.
Yeah. Now nowadays, I think they got Odyssey all the way down to their entry level, but a couple of years ago they did not. He says that things sound really good when he has the volume turned up loud, but when he's listening to at low volume, things sound muddy. This is his words, not ours. Muddy and lame. To the point he actually prefers to use his TV's built-in speakers. So is this
Ooh.
problem more to do with the speakers or with the AV receiver? Would having Odyssey make a big improvement at low volumes, or does it just need better, more sensitive speakers? This one actually took me a second to kind of think about it, because if you do the sort of thought uh, process that goes behind it, you're trying to think of, okay, the situation is when it's louder, he likes it, but when it gets quieter, he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and muddy and lame. Well, muddy I understand. Lame, not the best adjective here to at least illuminate me as to what your problem is. But muddy sounds like something weird's happening with the bass, and that any number of things could be going on to make the bass sound bad. Uh, but he prefers his TV speakers at low volumes.
Yeah, when he says muddy, I'm thinking he starts having trouble with dialogue
Yeah,
intelligibility.
yeah.
That's my thinking, and I'm thinking when he says lame, maybe there just isn't any bass to speak of. You know that. I mean, I'm totally guessing, but
Yeah, we're
that was
guessing
sort
at
of
this
my
point.
guess. Yeah.
So yeah, that's part of the problem with having a Q&A. Sometimes the cues aren't, make it hard to give you an A. But this is what I'm thinking. We talk a lot about we just talked about dynamic EQ for
Mhm.
Odyssey and how that makes sure what it basically does is as you change the volume, it's trying to keep the frequency response as even as possible. That means sometimes it boosts the bass, sometimes it cuts the bass, sometimes it does all kinds of other things. Okay, all to keep your perceived frequency response the same because you hear sounds, you're as sensitive to different frequencies differently at different volumes. So at certain volumes, you know, you want to speak, you want a flat frequency response. At other times, you need a little bass boost, or you won't hear the bass. What it sounds to me like you're experiencing is as the volume's coming down, some problem in your room or with your speakers, mostly in your room, some problem is getting accentuated. So let's say there is a bass like mode in your room that's making one little set of frequencies a little bit louder than everything else. Well, as your volume's coming down, so your treble and your bass is all coming down at the same time, that problem is getting accentuated because now the volume all around it is lower, but it's
Mhm.
staying louder relatively, and you're becoming more sensitive. That as that volume is staying the same, you're getting less sensitive to some of the other volumes. So all the bass is dropping off on one side of this hump, and on the other side, the tweeters and the high end is becoming quieter. So you're now having a hard time understanding. So when you switch to the TV speakers, you're just getting rid of all the bass because
Mhm.
there's none there, and now you're able to understand things better. That's about the only thing that really kind of came to my mind when it doesn't sound to me like it's the speaker's problem, because if it was the speaker's problem, it would be regardless of volume.
Yeah, I can pretty much say that it isn't your speakers. I mean, unless there's something physically broken with them or something. But the first generation Pioneer Andrew Jones speakers, yes, he did improve upon them in the second generation, but the first generation got a ton of praise. So, they're the problem isn't the speakers. It's not that you have bad speakers, and getting more efficient speakers wouldn't make them play any more clearly. They
No.
just need less power to play at exactly the same volume. So you're turning it down to whatever volume you want. You'd be using less power to drive more efficient speakers to that level, but it wouldn't make them any better. They're still the same volume. So the speakers aren't the problem. And honestly, if you were to upgrade your receiver and you got one that had Odyssey and it had dynamic EQ, there's a very good chance you would like the sound better at low volumes. Although, if one of the reasons you're turning it down is to make the bass quiet to not bother other people in the house at nighttime, you're not going to like dynamic EQ then because it boosts the bass so that you can still hear it. Honestly, I really suspect. Are you running your front towers large,
It
or
could
with
be,
a
yeah.
really low crossover? because when people say that dialogue starts to get muddy and things start to sound lame or muffled or things like that, almost always it's because lower frequencies are getting accentuated because the room is still reinforcing them, or you're sitting in a room mode
Yeah.
where all the sound is really doubling up right where you happen to be sitting, and that masks the dialogue. You crank things up, and the dialogue is loud enough; it overcomes that problem. But I'm wondering if he's running his speakers large or with a really low crossover. So the first thing I would suggest is if this isn't the case, set your crossovers to 80 hertz. Let your subwoofer take care of all the bass, even if you have the tower speakers and you thought, yay, I have tower speakers, they can play low. Here's one of the reasons why I recommend never setting your front speakers to large, even if they're capable of playing those frequencies. It's not going to sound good at your seat. So that might be it. I can suggest it anyway.
He's also worried about damaging his speakers when he does play things loud. He doesn't hear any clipping, but could a sudden, really loud sound possibly damage his speakers? Yes, it could, but because it's happened to me.
Right.
You,
Yeah.
you could blow a tweeter. That's
Yep.
probably what's
It
the
is
first thing.
theoretically possible.
If you haven't done it by now, it's not going to happen. Uh, I would just say I can almost say that without really qualifying it at all or trying to protect myself in any sort of legal way. But yeah, I don't really see that being an issue. The only time in all of my time of playing things extremely loud and doing stuff like that I've ever blown a tweeter was when I stuck in a CD that had a test sweep. Never played it before. The volume was set up really loud on my receiver, something ridiculously loud. Like the kind of loud that when it started, it was like a gunshot. Like I was
Dove to the remote.
I was diving to the remote to try to turn it back down. I mean, there was no like, oh, I think this might be a little bit loud. There was none of that. There was like, oh my God, what have I done? And that was when I broke a tweeter. Okay, it is not a guessing game. If you're worried about it, you don't have to worry about it. The time that you should be worried about, you will worry about it because when it might have happened, when you're like your ears are still ringing afterwards, sort of thing. These things are meant to take a lot more power than you think they are.
Yeah, and pretty much any AV receiver, even the most entry-level ones from any of the reputable brands that we're always talking about, they employ what's called soft clipping, so that even if the signal does go beyond what the amplifier can actually supply, it rounds off that signal, so it doesn't turn into a flat tabletop square wave that can damage your speakers. They make sure to round that off. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound the way it's supposed to, but it makes sure that it doesn't damage your speakers. So you're pretty darn safe on this. Although asking this question is yet another clue to me that maybe he's running his speakers large. And he's sort of read the whole thing where, yeah, if you run them large, you end up needing more watts. And he's worried I've got an entry-level receiver that doesn't have as many watts. So, yep, once again, setting them to small will probably alleviate those worries too.
All right. Layton has a small room, 12 foot by 11.5, so 11 and a half foot by 10 foot room, so 12 by 11 and a half by 10, which is almost a cube, which is sonically or acoustically not ideal. Okay, but he does have a good amount of acoustical panels, which if we haven't posted this to Facebook, I imagine we'll probably do that at some point. And he's also got two SVS PB12 NSD subwoofers. Yay! So supported box ones with 12-inch drivers. They don't sell those anymore, do they?
They were the predecessors to the 2000
to the
series.
2000, that's what I thought. To the size of room, his only positions where he can realistically place his two subwoofers are on both subs, with both subs at the front of the room next to his front towers. That is non-optimal, to say the least. He'd like advice on the best way to integrate his two subs given his placement restrictions.
Yeah, and looking at the pictures, I see where you're coming from, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking he's heard us say enough times that having your subwoofers even in diagonally opposite corners would be preferable to having them both at the front of the room. So he's probably heard that and gone, oh, darn, that's where I have my subwoofers. So, well, this is a bit of a thing because honestly, he can't really just go down to one subwoofer and do the subwoofer crawl because it's gonna end up in one of the same two spots. quite literally has nowhere else in his room where he can position those subwoofers. So this is when playing with the phase does come into effect, and either thankfully or not thankfully, his PB12 NSD subwoofers have completely variable phase on them. It's not just a 0 to 180 polarity switch. They actually can vary the phase continually all the way through. And this is exactly what that switch is for. Normally, the way we'd go about this is start by playing just one subwoofer, either one, doesn't matter. But start with just that one subwoofer playing. Try to get that one sounding as even and linear at your seat as you can, and then connect up the second one. Leave the first one alone now, but then connect up the second one, and it's literally just trial and error. Just keep playing your bass sweep over and over on repeat. Sit in your seat. Have someone else, a good friend who's willing to put in some earplugs, because they're going to be right up close to your subwoofer while this is happening. Go up there and gradually turn the knob, the phase knob, on that second subwoofer until it sounds as good as you can get it. Is it going to end up perfect? If you're super duper lucky, but that is about the only procedure you can do. It is a matter of trial and error, and that's what those phase knobs are for.
Okay, just so for everybody else, he's got a front projection system with a table up front, a small table up front that has his gear on it and a center channel. Then flanking that table, he's got his two subwoofers, and outside of those two subwoofers, he's got his tower speakers. Now, I kind of disagree that he doesn't have any other place to put these things. I'm looking at the back of his room. It looks like he's got his couch. It's really hard to see. Now, that's the side of his room. He doesn't really have a picture of the back of his room that's really super clear. But it looks like he's got like tri-traps in all of his corners, or like something going across his corners. And I know he's got a lot of absorption. He paid for all this absorption and stuff like that, and he wants to use all the absorption. If you lost the corner traps in one front and behind, in the back someplace, it seems like you should be able to use opposite corners if you got rid of that absorption. You're like, but that's absorption's there for a reason. Yes, I know that. Just get rid of it for a bit and give it a go. It seems to me
you might be able to do, leave one subwoofer where it is. Let's say the one that's close to the front left side, and then the diagonally opposite of that. So it wouldn't actually be in the corners, and you wouldn't have to remove the traps if there's a spot at the back of the room, that's diagonally opposite from the one at the front.
Yeah.
You can do that as well.
It's just he doesn't have a good picture of the back of the room. It's really hard to see. So it looks like he may have a trap in one corner back there as well. In which case you could lose that as well, just to give it a try. And you can take those traps and line them across the ground. I mean, you got them everywhere else, or you can hang them from the the top corners in the ceiling if you want to still use them. So yeah, what Rob said with the phase, that's going to be awful, but you could try that.
I mean, that is the procedure. If he has to leave them where they are, that's as good as you can do. And at least he does have that option by having that continually.
Yeah, that's true.
So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's going to be hard. He's also got a Pioneer Elite AV receiver with MCACC. He didn't tell us which one, did he?
No, I didn't have a model number on that one.
That's all right. But he has not liked the results at all. If it's an older one, I don't blame you, because I didn't like them either.
It's definitely one that doesn't do anything in the bass.
Yeah, we can see that from the screenshots he gave us, where we can see what it is doing, and it stops at, I'm going to have to go back and
63 hertz is as low as it goes.
63, and it's not doing anything below 125.
And it is a 1 octave filter. So it goes 1 octave at a time.
Yeah, it's not doing anything at 63. It's doing 125 as the lowest it's going. So there is no bass going on. Let's see here. I lost him. All right. He doesn't like the results. He just wants to get the best sound quality that he possibly can for his room. So he's like our advice regarding the MCACC results and anything else we can think of. Well, I mean, looking at, first of all, there's nothing, bass-wise, this is not helping you. Rob's already identified that. It's not doing anything below 63 hertz, or below 125, and even above 125, it's not doing much.
I would turn it off. It's doing more harm than good, in my opinion.
But really, if you look at it, it's not doing a heck of a lot. It's trimming down, I don't know which one this is, channel 4. I don't know what that means. Anyways, it's knocking down the volume by a decibel and a half. It's rolling off your highs pretty hard in one of these two pictures. The other one's not quite as bad, but the rest of it's like 2 dB here, 1 dB there, a half a dB. It's really not doing that much. So the fact that you don't like it, turning it off, really, it's not doing anything, dude. And then what it's doing are things I would probably go, why are you doing that? Stop it.
Yeah, and when the filtering is that coarse, when it's
Yeah.
a 1 octave filter, I mean yeah, more harm than good. So
Yeah, I would just get rid of it. So basically, you are looking for a way to place those subwoofers better in order to get the
yep,
best possible. Now, he's not really complaining
no,
about his.
no, he just wants
Pro.
to make sure he's optimized.
Yeah, so he's already kind of good. So at this point, you need to, think about, think a little outside the box about maybe moving some furniture around and seeing what you can actually get, and then decide. Okay, let's just say, for example, you really can't put a subwoofer in the one front corner, one back corner, even if you moved a couch, or one of the chairs that are in there. Like, just do it. Just do it to check it out, to see what it sounds like when you do it that way, and listen to it, and then go back to what you had before. I know moving those subs is not going to be easy. Not my fault. I didn't buy them. You did. To go back to listening to the way that you had them with the phase adjusted, however you decide you're going to do it, and then seeing whether or not it's worth it for you to figure out a way to get it, or if it's going to be good enough for you, because you can always do that.
Yeah,
So,
the only other suggestion I have from him, he didn't have a picture of his ceiling. I don't know if he has any acoustic treatments on his ceiling. Given how many treatments he has elsewhere in his room, I wouldn't shock me if he did.
yeah.
But if he does not, I do have to say, treatments on your ceiling can make a surprisingly large difference. They are a first reflection, just like the sidewalls are. I tend to kind of prefer actually putting diffusion on my ceiling versus absorption. That's just my personal preference, but it can make a kind of a noticeable difference when you treat your ceiling as well. So that's about the only thing I could possibly suggest.
Gene didn't like it. He had diffusion, like those wooden diffusion panels on his ceiling, and he ended up getting rid of them and putting a little bit of. So they have those GIC makes those absorptive diffusion panels, which diffuse the higher end, the higher frequencies, and absorb some of the lower stuff. He's got something like that on his back wall already. If you can see that
Yeah.
on his back wall, he's already got
Yeah,
something like
he's
that.
got diffusion there, yeah.
So it could very well be he's got something across. That's the absorptive diffusion stuff. That's not just a diffusion. I think that's the one that's foamy. Anyways, so you might try something like that as well. You just experiment. Since you've got all that stuff around anyways, just hang some up there for a few seconds and see what it looks like. What it sounds like to you. Whether that makes a difference. Drew has a big wraparound porch and wants to know which outdoor speakers to buy. Doesn't matter. I'm a fan of Yamaha. Just generally
As
speaking,
am I. Yeah.
the Yamaha outdoor speakers, I bought some for my parents. I've said this before. They were not very big. My parents had a huge backyard in North Carolina. I don't think they ever got super loud. But I know one time my dad accidentally turned on the Zone 2 and then started playing some music upstairs or in the house or watching TV, and it was pumping TV out to the backyard. And his neighbors, like a farm away, were like, called him up and said, "Why are we listening to The Walking Dead?" So it carries anyways, So get the speakers. To me, outdoor speakers, it's not really all that much about the perfect sound, because you're never going to get that. I've tested planter speakers, I've tested rock speakers, I've tested outdoor, like actually outdoor mounted speakers, and they all end up sounding pretty good. When you get them outside, you do what you can. Get the biggest ones that you think that your wife won't kill you about, because you want to get some bass out there if at all possible. But these guys they sell you these like in-ground subwoofers and that stuff. It's just kind of a waste. First of all, I just can't imagine the situation where your neighbors are not going to kill you, no matter for having a subwoofer outside. I mean, come on. But that being said, who really cares? You're just really looking for ambiance music, and for that you need a good high-end, kind of mellowish high-end, and as much bass as you can get your hands on.
Yeah, he was saying he was looking at some def techs that cost about $150 a pair, and he was looking at getting two pairs of those. That seems to be his budget target. The Yamaha NSAW 350s, which are the current iteration of over at the Wirecutter, the ones that they recommended most highly were Yamahas, a slightly older model. So the AW 350s are the current iteration of that model line, and they go for just under $100 a pair over on Amazon. So for the same $300 budget, he could get three pairs. He could get six of them, so that therefore he could have a pair on each of his three sides of his large porch. And he does already have a Dayton Audio MA1240A amplifier. That's a 12-channel amplifier. He has six available channels. He specified that, so he can drive six speakers. So I'm like, hey, same budget, highly recommended. I like the Yamahas. Tom likes the Yamahas. To me, all the stars are aligning on that to get you three pairs of those.
Yeah. It's, his main concern here, though, is how to place him. He wants good sound coverage for all three sections of his porch. All right, so he was going for four speakers to begin with. So he'd like to know how to best handle the stereo signal as well. Should he be use a summing mixer to combine the stereo signals into mono? Okay, so as far as placement goes, he has pictures of his house, and I guess we can put those up on Facebook or something like that, or if we want to. People might have an opinion about it. It's really hard to see from the pictures exactly, what to do. In this situation, especially if you end up getting six speakers, you're going to have so many speakers per this area that you just need to evenly space them. That's if you decide to go with a mono signal. I personally think that you should, if you're going to go with the stereo signal, you should put the speakers close together because you really want mono. Because let's think about it like logically, Drew. I'm talking directly to Drew here. Drew, let's think about it logically. Best case scenario. Best case is that somebody's sitting in that perfect spot where they get a stereo image. Okay. Worst case, I mean, not even worst case, every other case is that somebody is hearing like one speaker a little bit more than the other and it sounds weird. Are you going for sounds weird for most people and sounds pretty good for where you know where to sit? Or are you going for everybody having a nice speaker setup thingy outside where it sounds pretty good? Because if that's the case, then you kind of want to go mono.
Yeah, see, I'm a little bit on the other side here because one of the things that happens when you sum a stereo signal together into mono and then play it out of one speaker is that if there actually is stereo separation in the music, you can run into situations where the waveforms actually cancel out or double up in the signal itself. Now, I mean, you're going to get some of that if you put two speakers close together and they're playing stereo anyway, but it's even worse when it's already inherent in the signal.
Yeah, but you can put out, if he's using a receiver to do this with, he can just put out, you could just put it to mono and it should take care of all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. My choice, just to throw it out there, would be I would leave it alone. I just run it in stereo as it is, and I would have both speakers. Like he's got columns on the outside of his porch that are holding up the porch and then holding up any awnings or whatever that are over the porch. I would actually put both speakers of each stereo pair onto the same column and sort of 90 degrees to each other. Sort of the way if you've seen like those PA speakers, in a big square or something like that, more military things or whatever. In a movie, you'll see like the big tannoy speakers, those big horns that are blaring out, and you'll see that they're sort of arrayed in these 90 degrees to one another. That's the way I'd set it up. You'll get really good coverage. If you have the three pairs, you can have, one of those on each side of your three-sided porch. And yeah, you won't get proper stereo sound, but you're not going to anyway. So that's the way I'd go at it anyway. I think that's the simpler, easier setup, but I don't
know if he's using a receiver. It says he's using a Sonos Connect with an Apple Airport Express, so it might not be. I don't know if you can set it up for mono. I don't know if that's the case. I've never used Sonos before. So I'm sure it's whatever. Anyways, that's what we say. Steven, thank us for discussing his AV receiver, a Blu-ray player audio situation last week. That was the one where we told him that his receiver was crap.
Everything gets down mixed to stereo almost no matter what he does.
Yep.
It's not a happy situation.
So he's after his period of mourning, I think he did the whole Office Space thing and took his receiver outside and stomped it into the ground. Damn you! Damn you and your inferior HDMI inputs. I don't know what he did. He's decided that he probably wants to just buy a new AV receiver. Yeah, but he'd like to get it to last at least 4 years. Anything will last 4 years as long as you don't know it's all being downmixed to stereo.
He survived this long.
That's right. And he'd like it to be under $1,000. Yay! We could do under $1,000. Airport actually X4000 isn't that under $1,000 over at $700-800, right?
Add accessories for less. Yeah,
Accessory for less. There you go. Solved.
You're getting it refurbed.
He is interested in 4K TVs. I'm interested in 4K TVs too. I don't know what this has to do with anything. And Dolby Atmos. I'm not interested in that. So he's wondering what we would recommend. Well, we would recommend that you raise your budget because you have no chance. Now, 4K is easy. Hey, the X4000 will upconvert everything to 4K for you if that's what you're worried about. And a lot of things will pass it if that's what you're worried about. But Dolby Atmos, not a chance, Haas. You got no chance in the next year or maybe, well, year and then wait. Well, okay, so this next summer is when they're start coming out with. Well, I guess no. September we're going to see a Marantz come out for $2,000 that has 9 channels and Dolby Atmos, and it'll be able to process up to 11 channels. That's the SR7009.
009, yeah.
Yes, that one will be coming out in September-ish. So basically in time for CEDIA. We'll be seeing a lot of stuff. So that means that by the summer-ish, you'll be seeing accessory for less really start to have a lot of them. So you might be able to get it for $1,200 by then. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues Steven mentioned in his email is that he already has a 7.1 speaker setup. He said he'd like to keep that. He'd like to continue using that and then expand that to Atmos, which means if he wants to use all those speakers, he needs a minimum of 9 channels because he'd have to have at least 2 overhead speakers and probably wants 11 channels. He probably wants to have 4 overhead speakers. And that's going to be a challenge for $1,000 when they start coming out over the next couple of months, because it's supposed to be September, October, November, December is when everybody's is coming out. And the ones that can actually do 11 speakers are all the highest end ones, and they're all well over $1,000. So that's a challenge there. On the 4K TV side, it's that stupid thing where the ones that can do full bandwidth HDMI 2.0 cannot do HDCP 2.2 copy protection, and then the couple from Onkyo and Integra that can do HDCP 2.2 copy protection cannot do full bandwidth HDMI 2.0. That will, I am almost sure of it, all be settled next year. I am also sure that by next year, either Atmos will be enough of a success that it's continuing and price points will start to come down, or it will have done absolutely nothing and might disappear before it ever gets started.
No. It'll be around for at least 2 years.
I'm pretty sure.
No, well, it has to. They're building. They're still building.
Yeah.
2 and 3 years out. So.
I'm very tempted to say, because I've already said this before, this is a spectacularly good year to not buy a receiver if you're the sort of person who wants all the newest cutting-edge features, because it's going to be sorted out by next year. If you can survive for another year with what you already have, I am leaning
so this is what I say.
That direction.
Buy yourself a Denon X4000 right now. That's about $700-800. Okay? It's going to last for at least 4 years, and at that point, either Atmos will be a thing or it will not anymore, and then you can spend less than $1,000 and get your Atmos one or whatever it is that you're looking for. Just don't call us in 4 years and say, "Hey, the new crystal technology is coming out, and I want to buy something for under $1,000 for that." Because we're going to say, "Well, buy the Denon X4200 or 4350 or whatever the hell it will be by then." All right. He recently has cut the cord. Is wondering if there's any way to connect his over-the-air antenna to his AV receiver directly. No, no. Believe me, if there was, I'd be doing it right now. That would have been on par with Odyssey, Multi-Q, XT, Sub 32, all that stuff on my receiver list. No, you have to buy an external box of some sort. Uh,
or connect the antenna directly to your TV.
if you've got
Um,
that, yeah, I don't have that.
yeah, so I mean, the antenna has to be connected to a tuner. There is no AV receiver anywhere that has a TV tuner built into it. So it must be connected to some tuner. That can be the one that's built into your TV, or it can be an external
Weren't
box.
there some Sony receivers a while back that could accept cable card? I thought that was the case.
Golly,
That was a while back.
I don't recall offhand,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, the thing is, another reason that it might be nice to upgrade the AV receiver is because if you connect the antenna directly to your television, you can then use ARC, that is the audio return channel, which will send the audio that's coming from your antenna into your TV via HDMI to your receiver. But of course, you have to have a receiver that has an ARC capable HDMI output on the receiver. So it's actually a two-way HDMI connection in that case. That's what the
Most
audio
of the new
return channel
stuff
is all
will
about.
too.
Yeah.
Most of the new
Oh,
stuff does.
virtually all the new ones will. So yeah, this is going to be a question of how much do you really want Atmos?
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to wait regardless.
Yeah.
The only thing you could possibly do is buy one of the existing Onkyos, but every single one of the Onkyos that is on the market right now that can be firmware upgraded to Atmos maxes out at 7 speakers. The most it can do is 5 speakers and then 2 overhead. Every single one of them that's out there right now maxes out there, and that isn't what he's looking for. So my advice is wait. Wait a little bit. Live with what you have.
My advice is buy
Buy an X4000.
buy last year's receiver right now.
Right.
You know, you don't have to buy the X4000. I bought it, but you don't have to.
Right.
There's tons of like with Gabe we were talking about. He needed pre-ins for some of his
Yeah.
legacy gear. We found a Yamaha that did that. I don't think he bought it. Last time I talked to him, he hadn't bought it yet, but he was still eyeballing it. You don't eyeball it for too long. It's accessories for less don't last forever. I always say buy last year's receiver. Get yourself a good deal on one of those right now, and then skip all this HDMI 2.2 and HDPC or 2.0 and then HDPC CP 2.2. Skip all that since that's going to be a hot mess until they can fix that figured out. That you don't worry about 4K right now. Don't worry about Atmos, and then let the dust settle on that one. Enjoy your new receiver for 4 years. And then just make sure you get the right room correction. That's what I did.
Yeah, if you want to fake Atmos, you can do front height channels and use Dolby Pro Logic 2Z or DTS Neo X. There's your height.
There you go. Eliezer sent us a link to a post from a personal blog of the owner of Audio Advice, which is a high-end store in North Carolina, which is surely not biased in any way, shape, or form. Anyways, it's called Computer. I don't remember what it's called. Hold on a second. I've got it open right here.
Computer Music Science.
Finally,
Project.
it's called Finally. The Computer Music Science Project ends. Okay, and I like Raleigh. I think Raleigh's a nice town, and Chapel Hill, Durham, all that area. I think that's a really nice town. Fayetteville, not so much, but the rest of it's pretty good. So I don't have anything against them personally for living where they do. It's a beautiful area up there. But high-end stores are high-end stores, and blogs from high-end stores are worth their weight in nothing. So basically, it's a long spiel about digital audio, about playing back music from a computer, and basically he could not find something better than his USB DAC for a very long time after testing tons of stuff. But finally, somebody from England comes over and introduces them to NAIM, N-A-I-M or N-I-A-M, I can't remember which way it goes, gear, which of course they immediately started selling, and how as they went up in price points they just got better and better, and now he could hear things he never heard before, and everything. There's chocolate coming out the ports of his speakers, and even his wife and his dog and his kids and his neighbors.
You didn't go quite that far, but
and it's better than CD. And
alrighty, yeah. This is a lovely, lovely example of the age-old practice of the snake oil salesman, because when the snake oil salesman came to town and he pulled up in his cart and wagon and he set up and he said, "Oh, everybody gather round and come see what I've got to sell," he didn't immediately pull out the snake oil and try to sell it to you. No, he told you a nice long story filled with anecdotes and things that are true. filled with lots of things that would make the crowd nod their head in agreement and say, yeah, this guy is talking truth, and I know what he's talking about, and I understand where he's coming from. And then by the time he pulls the snake oil out, they're ready to believe all the craziness that he is about to spew forth on them about what the snake oil can do. And this blog post is written exactly in that style, because everything he says up to that point is true. All the stuff he's saying is true. It's stuff that if you're into computer audio and high-end audio and all that stuff, you'll be nodding your head and going, yeah, I've gone through the same thing. Yeah, I've looked for something better too. And then he hits you with the $4,000 name network player that, hearing details I've never heard before, even though he's been trying all this other really high-end gear and none of it could better his computer's USB DAC.
Yeah, he's not a dealer for those those people anymore.
This thing, it suddenly does. And then Name pulls out a special CD ripper. A special CD ripper. It's a magical CD ripper that makes the rips of your CDs sound better than playing the original CD. Sound better than any rip of any CD you've ever made. Because it's so special. And they didn't give a price point on that one because it's probably ridiculous. But even though he had just heard all this new detail in the $4,000 network player, after he ripped his CDs with the CD ripper, the special one, same difference again. Same different, more detail than the fourth, and then he connected their $6,000 player, and it was the same difference again for a third time. 3 times he's heard more detail than he's ever heard in his life. Oh, and then the part that really gives it away, right at the bottom, it says, if you've read this far and you'd like to know more, come check out this other post. He literally says, if you've gotten this far. If you haven't already said this is a bunch of BS and you're still with me, folks? Still with me? Good, because now I'm about to really turn up the BS dial. Come over here. Let me show you something behind the curtain. Oh, man.
Yeah. So this actually follows a very similar formula as high-end audio reviews do. So it's not like this is unique to blog posts from whatever. If you go to Six Moons or one of those high-end audio sites where they review high-end equipment, a lot of times it sounds, even stereophiles sometimes sound like this. It's just anecdotes, and I couldn't get it to work, and then I talked to the manufacturer, and he introduced me to this new piece of gear and suggested that I, stand on my head when I was listening to it, and boy, did that make a difference because I get more blood to my ears, and you're like, oh well, that doesn't exactly make sense, but okay, well, whatever, yeah. It just, it's really disingenuous and it's stupid, and frankly, I just don't buy it. I go at all my reviews with a level of skepticalness that I just don't think that these people have in their whole body. Like, I just think that people just walk up to them and hand them a banana and say it's an orange. They go, that is the weirdest orange I have ever seen. Tastes a lot like a banana, but it's an orange because you said so. I honestly believe that's how they go through life. Because I don't know how else they could get to where they are right now. Because I certainly would walk in there and go, this guy would say, oh, well, this is a CD ripper. I'm like, you are a freaking idiot. Get out of my face. It's ones and zeros. What are you going to do? Make them 1 year and 0 a year or something? Shut up. Oh, no, it's going to be better. Oh, get out. God, I've seen it before so many times. It irks me. So we're going to go on because we're going to run out of time and my brother's
Yes, we are.
All right. According to this note here, we should be able to answer these quickly. So these are yes or no's. No, they're not going to be yes or no's. This is the first one. Rennie over on Google Plus asked if Chromecast could be connected directly to an HDMI port on the AV receiver, or it needs to be connected directly to a display. Any port will do. Any HDMI port will do. I connected it both to. In fact, I just bought one for my dad for his birthday. It was on Sunday. Yay. Now he's 46 for I don't know. I think it's 22 years running. Anyways, he 14, I don't know, something like that. He's got the Chromecast now, and I connected it to the TV, and then I connected it to the AV receiver. Works fine, just both ways, no problems there. Mark,
you just do need USB for power. Just keep that in mind, and it does have the little thing where you can plug the USB output from the Chromecast into a little adapter, so you can plug it directly into a wall outlet.
And it
But yeah,
has an extender for the HDMI port too, in case
that's
you
right. Yeah, in case
feel
it's
tight.
blocking the Wi-Fi signal or something in the back of a cabinet. So.
Or if there you have a bunch of HD, and the thing is it's long and it has like a little, it's like round at the end. Well,
Hmm.
that's just the right length so that if you have another HDMI plug right next to it, the
Hmm.
HDMI plug is usually short enough where you can still get it in there, and the round part doesn't touch anything. Mark H is considering getting a Marantz Slimline AV receiver. It's the NR 1604. His current setup, he's got a pair of monoblock amplifiers that he uses to power his front, left, and right speakers. The 1604 has front, left, and right pre-outs, but no other pre-out connections other than the subwoofer for the other speaker channels. So it's just left and right pre-outs and subwoofer pre-outs, no center, no surrounds, none of that. So Mark's a little bit concerned. He wants to make sure that he'll be able to use those front, left, and right pre-outs while powering the other 5 speakers with the NR 1604's built-in amplifiers. Wants to make sure that connecting those pre-outs won't result in everything getting down mixed to the only 2 channels. No worries. Set your amplifier. Set the receiver so that it's powering sending the front channels to the pre-outs. Tell it you got a bunch of other channels, and set your surround mode to the correct surround mode that involves surround, and you
Yeah,
will be fine.
you don't even have to tell it that you're using the pre-outs. Those pre-outs are just always active,
Are they
and the
really?
front,
Some of
left, and
them
right.
aren't. Yeah, some
Yeah,
of them aren't.
no, they're always active. The front, left, and right speaker binding posts are also always active, so it just doesn't matter. It's just sending the signal out there. And I actually kind of like that design on the slim lines because it lets you have this nice slim receiver that fits where other big beefy receivers don't, and then you can power your most power-hungry speakers, which are your front, left, and rights, with an external amp if you want to. And
Yeah,
you're
I am
you're
a fan of
good to go.
that receiver line as well. When it first came
Yeah,
out, I thought it was brilliant, and
yeah.
I thought that they really did a good job choosing, picking and choosing what they were going to put back there. So
Hmm.
I think that's a good choice on his part. Uh, Liar, no,
Lior.
Lior. I'm never getting that right. I didn't get it right the first time. I'm still not gonna get it right. He's a long-time listener from Israel. He sent some links to some great pictures of his theater. Yay. He has an Onkyo TXNR9, was it 929? And
$929.
has been monitoring the temperature typically right after watching a movie. The top structure is top surface about 104 to 109 degrees Fahrenheit. Sounds like an Onkyo. Other owners have responded to similar temperatures, but he recently watched a movie, and right after the temperature was 122 degrees Fahrenheit. That's freaking hot. The only other time his AV receiver got that hot was right after the initial setup running Odyssey. So we'd like our guesses as to why the temperature sometimes spikes like this. He thinks it might have something to do with the processors, more so to do with the processors than the amps because of the Odyssey thing. But he's not sure. There's no way it's the processor, dude. It just doesn't take that much power to process things these days. It's not like there's tubes in there. So it's almost certainly the amps.
Hmm.
So I don't know what movie you were watching. I don't know if you're running your
He
speakers
did
full
say it
range.
was a 7.1 mixed, specifically 7.1 discrete movie.
No. Yeah.
So it is using all 7 of his speakers. One of the reasons why things are heated up after Odyssey runs is because it is sending a full power signal through all of your speakers in rapid succession. So it is actually sending full power to all of the amps, which is a pretty rare thing. But certain movies are going to have more sounds coming out of your surround and surround back speakers than others. A ton of movies barely use the surrounds and the surround backs, but a handful put quite a bit of sound back there. If you're watching the latest Transformers, everything is cranked up as loud as it can possibly go with tons of surround effects. You'll probably get the temperature up to like 145 if you're watching that thing.
Get a
So,
fan, dude. You can. Oh well, you can get a fan, but you could. I also wonder how much he's running full range here. You
mm,
gotta make sure you got a crossover set. That'll help somewhat. If you're trying to push a lot of power into your mains or something like that, that might be part of it as well. But yeah, it's your amps. It's
mhm.
always the amps. It's always the amps. Get a fan.
That's why
Uh,
they got big heat sinks on the amps.
yeah. Michael wants some banana plugs. This is what you terminate your speaker cable with, and it's kind of sticks straight into the back of those 5-way binding posts. He wanted some, but his local Best Buy and Future Shop only had crappy ones that wouldn't accept 12 gauge wire. That sucks. And
Hmm.
those were like $18 for 2 pair. So what can we recommend? Rob's got a bunch of recommendations of. There's 2 types of banana plugs. There's compression type and the other type, the screw type. I call them screw type. But the
Locking, they usually call them.
was that locking? Yeah,
They, yeah,
the
locking.
the uh, the compression type basically in the post that goes into the back of the five-way binding post and the post that's on the banana plug, there'll be the round part of it will have I mean God, it's going to end up sounding dirty. Where's Lee? The shaft of it will have like something like a spring sort of thing like coming off of it. So there's a bent piece of metal that will that's sticking out from it from the side, so that when you stick it in, it compresses that metal so it keeps it in place.
Yeah,
I
it's
am
just a
not.
friction fit. That's all
Yeah,
it is.
I am not a fan of that.
Hmm.
I find it doesn't work as well. They don't last. The first time you put them in, they're like, "Yay, it works!" But they fall out for some, or you start switching your stuff like I do quite often.
Hmm.
They tend to lose that friction. They tend to lose that a lot. The spring gets compressed too much and doesn't work very well. I'm not a fan of those. I like the locking and the screw type. And those I found, and I was having a hard time finding them, but I did find some over at Amazon. They're called GLS Auto Locking Series. I don't know, not really auto. You have to screw them down. I don't know why they say that. This is generation 4. There's 8. It's an 8-pack. So there's 4 reds and 4 blacks for $19. So it's not cheap. It's certainly not as cheap as some of the stuff that Rob found. But you may be able to find them for cheaper. These are the ones that the highest end speaker wire are usually have. They have something that looks like this. They may put some shrink wrap around it or get something special. But generally, this is what the highest end speaker cable has on it. And once you lock these things on, they are on. You can pick up your receiver by them. I don't think you should, but you could.
Yeah, Blue Jeans Cable also offers locking banana plugs, and I forget the price on those. Maybe you can look up on
Yeah,
those
I'll
while
do it
we
real quick.
talk about the ones I recommended come from Sewell. You can find Sewell over at Amazon. Michael happens to be in Canada, so Sewell is sold on Amazon.ca. And then we also have another website in Canada called JustOneCable.ca, which is basically the mono price of Canada. And they sell this. JustOneCable.ca sells the same banana plugs that mono price sells in the States, and they're very inexpensive. And they are the compression fit that Tom isn't such a fan of, but they're so cheap. It's like if they ever run out, oh no, it's another $1.50 for another pair. So on that side, I'm not too worried about it. But I like the Sewell ones. They're called the Deadbolt. That's the particular line I like, and they come in a pack of 12 pairs. Actually, you can get them in 6 pairs as well, but the pack of 12 pairs goes for just over $30 with free shipping. So
Yeah,
they're super cheap. And
at Blue Jeans, the locking banana plugs are. It says, well, I guess it's per pair. It's
mhm,
$6.75 per
mhm.
pair.
Yeah, so that's a
So
little pricey.
that's pretty pricey. Uh, you can get them a little bit cheaper from Amazon. So to do your research, you decide which one you want. There's spades. There's no reason you can't use the spades or even bare wire. I mean, if you're not going to do, that's what I tell people. If you're not going to making a like, I like to have the termination on there. I even before I knew I was going to work for Audioholics, I bought it 'cause I thought it was cool. That being said, I don't really think most people need it. Use your
Well, this came up because we've talked so much about having the single strand potentially of speaker wire that makes its way across and causes
learn to
your
solder
AV
the ends of your
receiver to go into
speaker wire
protection mode.
so that when you stick it in there and you lock it down, you won't have that problem. And that's pretty much that. That's cheaper. Uh, so you can do that too. All right. Before I get invited by my brother, I want to say that's everybody, right?
It
That's the whole
is. We
thing.
made it all the way
Yeah,
through
told
every
you.
single
No
one that
problem.
was on the list.
All
Oh
right, you
yeah, no
contact
problem.
us at avrant.com. Go to the website and comment. You can email Rob at Rob at avrant, Tom at avrant. Go to facebook.com/avrant podcast. Twitter at First Reflect for Rob and me at avrant_Tom. If you want to ask us some questions, then please do. Thank you. Once again, let's give a special shout out to our listeners of the week, Eliezer, Michael, and Sim. Thank you very much, guys. Your generous donations have kept this podcast going, and we'll continue to keep it going in the future. Keep those questions coming, guys, and we will talk to you soon. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Mandry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
And the after party will start in about 10 minutes. See you guys.